guys? This is Megan Takemi. So for this video, we will be implementing the adding of company permissions, and along with it is checking if there are duplicate permissions feature for our custom property rentals management software back office. So we will start with the back end and then going through the front end. So now let's continue. So we will be going to the backend first. So here we do have this permissions controller, which do have a endpoint of API v1 permissions, and we will be targeting this method here, which is the post add permissions async with the parameter of add permissions command. So for this method here, the route here is basically this empty string here. So basically, we will be accessing this one, this endpoint here, and then this endpoint just basically produces the or returns the permissions that was added if it is successful. But if not, this endpoint will return a status code of 400 or meaning the bad request. So for this specific method here, notice that we have the authorized attribute here with a policy of has feature access. So what this means is basically I just implemented a security feature which will tell that if a user or logged in user accesses a specific endpoint or feature within the platform or the backend, and then if that user has no assigned permission to that specific feature that he or she was trying to access, then he or she will not be able to access it, and instead give him or her a error. But otherwise, if that user has permission to access that specific endpoint, then the request will go through. So for the implementation for this custom authorization policy is right here. So first is we needed the a class which inherits from the I authorization requirement. So here we do have the feature access requirement, which inherits from this one here, the I authorization requirement. And then next will be a handler, which we have here, the public class feature access requirement handler, which inherits from the authorization handler, which uses the feature access requirement that we have here. Okay, so basically, what this handler does is just to get the headers, namely the x-cid or the company ID, the x-uid or the user ID, and then the x-permission name or the perm here from the client, and then parses it, and then uses these values here in checking if that user has access to this specific kind of feature based from the permission. But if not, that user will receive a error, or he or she will not be able to push through the access. So basically, that's the logic here. So then again, get this header, which is passed from the front end, and then validating it whether the user has access to a specific endpoint or not. So yeah, this is the implementation for it. So now to proceed, we will be going next to the command. Okay, so we have here the add permission command, which has the response of list of strings. So basically, this list of strings, these are the permissions which are entered from the front end. And then if ever that the request is successful, so it just basically return those permissions, and then later we, we will see this in action. So for now, let's just discuss the payload. So for this command here, we have the company ID and then the list of permissions of type string. And then going to the handler, we do have this add permissions command handler, which inherits from the request handler and has the add permissions command with the response of list of strings. Okay, so for the logic, so we do have here is we validated first the company if it exists or not. If not, it will return a message of company not found. But otherwise, if the company is existing, so we will proceed with here. So basically, what we do here is we just retrieve first the company permissions, and then we have this variable here like the new permissions, null permission count, duplicate permission count. So basically, we will be using these variables later to validate things if things are good or not. Okay, so moving forward, so here we validated if the company permissions is null or not or does not have a any contents at all. So we will return the message of bad request and no existing permissions. And if the permissions from the payload does not have any data within it or the count is zero, so again, we will be returning a message of bad request and then the no permissions and payload message. And then if the permissions from the payload contains a white space or null or doesn't have any values at all, so we will be returning a bad request and then a message of invalid permissions. So here next is basically check for null or empty permission pass from payload. So basically this um, line here from line 53 and here from line 59 to 65. So basically these are the same or basically logic wise this is the same. It's just that I just need to refactor this later. Sorry for that. But to um, proceed, okay. So if null permission count is greater than zero, then we will be returning the 400 bad requests, and then the empty or null permissions are not allowed. So basically, this here from line 70 to this one here, basically this functions as the same. I will just refactor this later in the future videos. Okay, but now let's just leave this as is. Okay, and okay to proceed. So for this one here, check duplicate permissions between the company permissions and the payload permissions. So okay, so for here, as what the comment suggests that what I did here was just to check if there are duplicates from the company permissions and the payload permissions pass. So if there are duplicates, so the server or the backend will return a status code of 400 at request, and then the message of duplicate permissions are not allowed. And moving forward here, so what will so here I did the what do you call this? I just sorry. What I did here was to loop over the permissions and getting the new permissions from the payload, and then here checking if the new permissions has no data at all. So basically we will be um returning a status code of 400 and then the no permissions added. And here what I did here was if there are new permissions, so I just loop um, over those new permissions and then assigning it to the permissions list, having the company ID, what permission name, and then the date created. So basically, this part here refers to new permissions that was added, and then I just passed the permissions here to the save company permissions async. So here, um, we pass here the list permissions, and then we just added it to the database and then saved it. And then, of course, if there are errors, so this catch function here will throw. So basically, going back, after saving this company permission, so we will be returning the status code of OK and a success of true, and then having the message of permissions added. Okay, so let's now see this in action. First, I will be building the project, and then I just select the API first, and then proceed with debugging. Okay, so now that we have run the project, so let's go or let's check with Postman. Okay, so basically, we'll start to log in first. Okay, so we now have logged in and um, have the token. So let's go to the add company permissions. So for example, let's test the validations first, like this one here, and check if our validations are working. So first, let's start with sending a empty payload, and remember that but sorry prior to testing this one first, um, please remember that we are also testing like this one here, the uh, the getting of the request headers, which is the CID, the UID, and then the permission name, and checking if that user has a permission of accessing that specific endpoint via the permission. So here, for the actual request for that one, we do have here in Postman like the headers. So basically, we pass the UID, the permission name, the CID or the company ID, which has these values here. So this user ID, we get this user ID and company ID from the values here, this one here. And then for the permission name, well, of course, we do have that here, permissions can add. So like this one here. So basically, this user has a permission of permissions can add. So we are expected that this will work. Okay, so going back with the request, first is let's pass the um, payload which has a no permissions listed, and to verify, let's put a breakpoint just so that we can validate if the requests we do have here is working. Okay, so let's start to test it, and let's just click send. So here we can validate that the model is not null, so meaning the company is existing. And now here we get the company permissions. This one here, yep, that's working. And now let's first check if the company permissions is null. So it is not, so we can skip this. And if the permission that we have sent is empty, so we check it here. So if the request that permissions that count is equal to 0, so basically we will be returning this bad request and then the message of no permissions and payload, which is working. So yeah, this is it. So as you can see, when we pass a blank or empty permissions within the payload, so the validator or the logic that the checking logic that we have is working. And next will be what's the other one? If we pass like this one here, we do have a empty string. So again, let's pass it, validate it if it's working. Okay, so now the permission um, that we pass contains a empty string. So the breakpoint hit, and then yep, we are then again returning a bad request for that one. This one here, valid permissions, which is from here. And now, if we try to pass, let's say, if we try to pass a existing permission, so for example, rooms can add, which we can confirm that within in the data we do have here rooms can add, right? So basically, this rooms can add here, this is already an existing permissions within the company. So let's try to check it. Again, we will be dealing with the breakpoints. So okay, so like this one here. So this will take quite some time because we are individually checking the permissions. So, oh yeah, okay, so here we notice that this permission here is already an existing permissions within the company. So we do have this duplicate permissions are not allowed, which we can verify through this one here. Rooms can add, we already have that. So the payload is rooms that can add. So yep, our logic for the validation is correct. And if we go back to the um, to basically adding a valid permission. So for example, let's try to add we try to add a let's say test permission one, test permission two, send it. So we hope that this will be. So I think you already have saved it. So yeah, now we can we have already proved that the backend and the validation checkings are working because here when we send um, permissions that was not um, existing within the company's permissions, so we have received the status code of 200 and a message of permissions was added. So let's check in the database if we do have that. So basically, yep. So the payload that we passed here, which are the test dot permission one and two, we can confirm that within the database we do have this test one and two, or the test dot permission one and two. So basically, we have proved that, or we can validate now that the backend and sorry, sorry, we can now prove that the backend validation plus the logic is now working. So let us now proceed with the by integrating the front end and the back end. So let me just close this files for a bit, and then we open the ones that we needed. So basically, since we are done with the back end and tested it, and and we confirmed rather that the back end is already working. So let me just collapse this one and then proceed with the um, front end. So now what we do have here is this new permission, and then we will open the, I think that's yeah, this one here. So the permissions controller, this one here. Okay, so is there anything else? I think okay. So now we will be testing the integration between the front end and then the back end. Oh, I forgot to open this one. Like here, okay. Okay, so let us start. I'll just put some breakpoints so that we can trace the flow. Okay, so let's let's build it, and then let's run the entire stack. Okay, so we will try to log in now as 51, and then check the integration if it's working. Okay, so now let's go to permissions and then add permissions. Okay, so first off, let's test the logic or the validation that we have for the back end, and then validate it in the front end. Okay, so now basically let's try to save these permissions without even having a payload for it. So okay, so here we have no, or we didn't pass by any permissions yet, so this should um prompt or display an um error. Okay, so this is the back end. Okay, right. Okay, so the okay, so one thing that I would like to um emphasize for this request is, for example, um so basically you notice that we sent a blank payload right from the front end to the back end via this via this API call here, but notice that the response status code was 200, and then later while moving through this part here, so basically, so we have a status code of 200 here because the reason why for that one is we have successfully communicated from the front end to the backend, and that's why that is or has a or that request has basically or rather the server has acknowledged the successful handshake for the front end and then the back end, which is the request. But then within our backend here, we have this custom error that we return to the UI based from the logic for the validation that we have. So like this one here, here, and by any part of the backend which returns a custom error message despite the payload. So going back here, so here the server returns 200, right? And then basically that was successful. But then because of our custom response from the backend, so we need to deal with like this one here, the the status code of 400 because we have a custom logic there which returned a status code of 400 and then this message here, the no permissions in payload. So basically, we handle that via this one here. So as you can see, handle the custom error that was returned from the web API, despite the fact that the handshake is successful. So now here we do have this response from the server of status code of 200, status code of 500, and success of false, and then the errors here. So we handled it like this one. Okay, and then we proceed with like this one here. So this is how we handle the custom error from the back end, despite the fact that the handshake from the front end and the back end was successful and has a status code of 200. So moving forward, so like the request here, we do have the item of not null. So we should return this error or display this error within our front end. So here, since we have errors from the back end, so we have it here, validated it, and then just added the error within the memory, and then basically return back to the permissions. So that one, so basically, yep, that was the so basically the one that you saw here, like the red one. So basically, the error there was from the back end, and then we handled it via the one that I showed you, the custom handling within the front end, and basically just displaying the error within the front end, which is that notification that you saw. So now let's try to add a new field. So now we do have a new field here, but then we will try to submit it despite the fact that we don't have any rendered value here. So then again, save and then run the usual validation. So we do have a empty string passed. So this validation here was the match of it. So we will be returning the status code of 400 and then the error of invalid permissions. So yeah. So then again, the success status code is 200, but then since we returned a custom error, so we will need to parse that like this one here. Status code of 400 and then the error of invalid permissions. So let's move forward. Yeah, like this one here, invalid permissions. So now to do, let's try to pass an existing let's say test permission 1. Save it. Again, run through the usual checking. Yes, so we do have this duplicate, right? So this will basically return a status code of 200 and then duplicate permissions are not allowed message. So proceed. Again, this status code is 200, but then we needed to parse the custom error that we returned from the backend. So that will be this one here, the status code of 400, and with the error of duplicate permissions are not allowed. So again, yep, okay. So now we determined that the logic for the validation within the backend is working. So let's try to pass a valid payload. So let's say 3, permission 4. Again, run the usual routine. So now within the new permissions, we do have 2, the test permission 4 and 3 and 4. So now we will be successfully saving the permissions for that company. Okay, so that's it, 200, and then we need to pass the auto response. Yep. Now we see that we have a notification of permissions were successfully added, and then we were redirected to the permissions list within the platform, which we will be working on next after this video. Okay, so after this one here, so basically let's just log out first and go back to the source code here. So now let's just try another another test, but this time we will be not using the breakpoints here because we already have tested uh, and things are working. Let's just try to do a test again without using the breakpoints just so that we can see how the process works. Okay, so again, let us build this and then run this again. Okay, let's log in. That's routine 1. First. Okay, let's try to add 3 permissions, which is 5, 6, and 7. Let's 7. So let's try to save this. Okay, we can now uh, successfully add the company permissions to the respective company that we are assigned to, and then upon checking the database, yeah, test permission 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so now that we have successfully saved or tested our add um, company permissions, and we saw that the logic or the implementation is all good. So yeah, I hope that you have learned something from this um, video, and you find it interesting. So the next feature that we will be working on will be the viewing of permissions, and then yeah, stay tuned for it, and thank you.